Thank you. We'll bring to order this technically first meeting of the Homelessness Committee. And let's begin with introductions. And if we can start with our new Assembly member, Mr. Dunbar.
My introductions to you or to the audience?
Whoever you want.
Okay.
Just let us know who you are.
Forrest Dunbar, Assemblyman from East Anchorage.
And Pete Peterson.
Dick Training.
Tim Steele.
John Weddleton.
Bill Evans.
Elby Gray Johnson.
Melinda Freeman, the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services.
Nancy Burke with the Mayor's Office.
And as we did with sort of the ad hoc committee we had previously, it would also be helpful for us because there's a lot of stakeholders in the audience, if the audience wouldn't mind introducing themselves and letting us know if there's any affiliation they have with this issue. And we'll begin with you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Aquino, and I'm the Executive Director of Catholic Social Services.
Jeff Jesse, CEO of the Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, and yeah, this is a big deal to us.
I'm Nicole Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services, and I am also the co-chair of the HCOSH Committee, which is a subcommittee on homelessness of the HAM Commission.
Doug Lampkin. I work for NeighborWorks Alaska, and I am chair of the HAND Commission.
Carmen Wenger, I am the Director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness.
I'm Nikki Shinners. I'm standing in for Elaine Dahlgren from Volunteers for America.
Maria Brown, Aquila.
Christopher Constant with Aquila, Fairview Community Council and Business Association, and I sat through every one of those meetings of the last.
Beth Wilson. I'm with the Division of Behavioral Health, and I also serve on the Alaska Coalition of Crossing Homelessness.
Tom McGrath, I'm just a retired guy watching.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sue Brogan with United Way of Anchorage.
Jan Jones, First Covenant Church. We've been working for a long time with APEC, as APEC members.
And Warren Jones, First Covenant Church.
And in the back, please.
I'm Kate Toomey. I'm with the Alaska Court System, the mental health court, and the centralized property center.
Greg Newman, I'm with the Anchorage office. Josh Nolan, Supervisor of the Anchorage Branch Captain.
Mark Center Officer,
Chairman Porter, the Thorough Center.
Jerry James, Community Services.
Sir.
Brad Rasmussen Foundation.
Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at the agenda, or is there any additions or subtractions? I would like to actually, if it's okay with the committee, move item 4, which talks about our action plan, up to the front here. And I'd like to kind of bring everybody up to speed on how we've kind of morphed from the ad hoc committee to this and what the goal is going forward. I think that'll help with the presentation and probably better context, if that's all right with everyone. And seeing no other changes, we'll go with that. And so let me begin with, again, thanking you all for being here and sort of explaining what you think we're doing anyway. As many of you, like Chris was saying, participated in our year-long ad hoc committee meetings last year that was focused on more or less the problems of chronic inebriation in Anchorage. That committee was, we got a lot of support from the community. There were a lot of stakeholders present. It did create a lot of synergy and bring a lot of people together that tend sometimes to be siloed. The committee was a very good educational experience, I think, for members of the assembly that participated. The issues we're dealing with are not necessarily strictly common sense. There's a lot that goes into these issues that are multifaceted and impact other areas, and I think it was important for the assembly to understand that at least better than we did previously. Initially, the goal of that committee, if you recall, at the time there was no official action going on in the municipality to address that problem, and the Assembly Chair Trainee formed the ad hoc committee to take some action, so somebody in the municipality was addressing the issue. While during the course of our meetings, during the course of that committee, we obviously had a mayoral election, and a new mayor took office whose one of his top goals was the issue of homelessness. And through that, and through the auspices of the trust, we've gotten the benefit of having Ms. Burke, Nancy Burke, who is the city's homelessness coordinator, and the city has sort of adopted a plan to address this issue. Because the city had a plan and this became a priority of the administration, I think it was important that the assembly and this committee, or the previous version of this committee, the ad hoc committee, didn't work at cross purposes with the administration. We've got enough of that goes on in this issue, and I think the better course of action was to sort of align ourselves with the administration's effort. To work with the administration doesn't mean we're necessarily going to agree on everything the administration wants to do, but we have a much better opportunity to actually make some positive change, I think, if we are at least aligned. So that led to the creation of this committee, which is a little broader. It's called the Homelessness Committee. It takes in not just the chronic inebriates, but the whole spectrum of homelessness, which is obviously, as you all know, more far-ranging. And as I see this committee going forward, and it'll be up to this committee to decide exactly how we do this, but the initial idea is that we serve as sort of, I don't want to say, oversight, because this is, Ms. Burke works for the administration, the mayor has his plan, but a coordination between the assembly and the plan, and to measure our progress on this issue. And I've already spoken with Ms. Burke on this and Ms. Freeman. And our goal is to develop sort of a dashboard of metrics that we are going to try to measure this problem as best it can be objectively measured, to see where we're making progress, to see where we're not making progress, to see if what we're doing is actually having any beneficial effort. And we are in the process of creating that dashboard to determine what metrics would be useful for us to look at. And this way, we can come to these meetings in each month, or however often we end up meeting, take a look at the metrics and analyze, okay, we see a trend here, we don't see anything here, what are we going to be doing? And the administration can keep the assembly up to date on that, on this progress of this meeting. At least that's the overall plan. And I did not, as chair, I'm remiss, and I didn't create an action plan. We had a very good action plan for the ad hoc committee, but because in my mind this committee sort of just kind of morphed from that committee, I didn't take the time to create an action plan. What I plan on doing, if it meets with the approval of the committee, is to draft something up along the lines of what I just told you that will be the action plan for this committee. I'll share it with the committee members, and by our next committee meeting, we can review that, make whatever changes the committee would like to make, and go forward from there. Are there any questions on that from any of the committee members?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could I take a moment to recognize that, for the record, the mayor is doing
It's true. Good, thank you.
you know,
Okay, if there are no other questions on that, we'll move into our presentation, and we have the aforementioned Ms. Burke, the homelessness coordinator, who's got a presentation for us.
So I thank you for that framework, because I would also like to maybe do a little bit of background on the work that we did when I came in to office. The work that this committee has done is tremendous and brings to us skilled leadership in the community to help us move forward with this plan. I just attended the National Housing First Conference in March in Los Angeles, and when I explained that our community had gone through this process, people felt that that was one of the assets that we had to move forward in having leadership who understand issues around homelessness. So thank you for the work that you did, and to the community members who helped do that. And I asked Melinda if we might jointly be together with this committee, because she did the historical work, and we're bringing some of those pieces forward to continue moving, and we're a natural team. So that's really wonderful. And when we came into office, the mayor said, we don't need a separate plan. The mayor doesn't need a plan. There are plans in the community. There are 7 plans that cover homelessness in different ways in Anchorage. And what we decided to do was really review all of those plans, and one of which was the recommendations from this committee's work.
and we pulled up pieces of those that we felt would help us with a framework that would move the community forward. And so the handout that you have is the framework that we've developed, and I think because there are some new members, we might go through it. We have 2 hours today, which is a really good amount of time for conversation and for discussion. But as there are questions, we can move away from this framework and move into the dashboard. I do have the beginning of a draft dashboard for one part of the initiative to review today. So if that's acceptable with the committee, we'll do that.
Great, that's fine, Nancy. And I just, to interrupt, I did want to mention that we will have pizza at this meeting is the fact that makes this meeting the most popular meeting with the assembly. It'll be delivered later and it's for everybody, so as that comes in, feel free to help yourself. So, thank you.
There are a few additional stakeholders in the process. Of course, the Mental Health Trust with Russ Webb, the chair, and Jeff here supporting our partnership going forward. We have Rasmussen Foundation, who is another really key player in the work. And then Doug Lampkin and some other members from the HAND Commission are here, as well as Carmen Wenger from the Homeless Coalition, United Way. We have so many of the right players around the table. And it'll also be the work for me and for the group of people thinking about this and helping us plan to integrate all of those plans, because the Homeless Coalition does the community's plan on homelessness and has a body of work that they've brought forward and presented. They advised the assembly, so that community plan is really the base of the work that the Mayor's Action Agenda is pulling from. So there's, I want to make sure that we're really going forward with all of our partners and coordinating and collaborating as we go. So.
And Nancy, if I can just interrupt you for 1 second, I believe our new Assembly Chair, Ms. Gray Jackson, has an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chair Trey and I are in the middle of revising all of our committees, and we have made a decision that this committee is really, they're all important, but this is very, very important committee that affects our entire community. So we made a decision that this committee is going to be a committee of the whole, and we'll hope for that the majority of us will show up to each meeting, but it's a committee of the whole, and we want to let everybody know that right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The reason for doing that is homelessness affects everybody in Anchorage. I've been in some meetings where I've been told by assembly members, we don't have homelessness in our part of town. Homelessness happens all over Anchorage. So the best way to do that is make this committee the whole. That way every assembly member is responsible for being in the community. Or not, but it's their choice. We want to support them in our community.
Thank you both. That's perfect.
It's very exciting. Thank you for that. So to begin, as you addressed, in this slide, we're trying to present the focus areas. There are about 5 different areas of homelessness where we see common impacts. Those are around the single adults that we sort of think of when we think about homelessness. We might have a picture in our mind of that person on the street. Some of those adults might be veterans. There are also young adults, and we've maybe been seeing a little bit more of that in certain parts of the community, young adults and people who are transitioning and having challenges at those times. There's family homelessness, and then there's a group of people who are homeless because they've just been released from corrections or from jail. And each of those groupings of populations has community committees and work groups, and so we've begun to sort of map out who's taking the lead on each of those areas. And in the mayor's plan, the first place we wanted to start was with the single adults, because we have that's probably one of our largest homeless service delivery systems, but it's also one that has funding streams, if you will, that come in that drive silos in the work, and it's very challenging for people to look across those funding areas to coordinate as a community. And so following what Utah did, what bigger communities, Los Angeles did, bringing together all of the people who work on those issues in one setting each week to focus on how we're conducting outreach, how we're identifying those individuals, is the first step that was a pretty easy one to accomplish. We've been meeting with the outreach workers in the homeless adult system since January. We did the point-in-time count. We're still waiting with our fingers and toes crossed. Where's Carmen? Hi, Carmen.
A week and a half.
So we'll get those numbers and we'll know what our January count was. It's just a benchmark that helps us know how we're doing on homelessness, but will become one of our key benchmarks. Then the outreach groups are meeting each week, and we've developed a list of people, and we're working off of a by name list with that group. I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through. But then turning our attention to the right hand of the slide, where there's some community infrastructure pieces that we really need to have in place. We need to know where the support services for people are in the community and how we move them forward. We need to know about the physical locations of the buildings. Are the way we're operating the buildings and the hours we're operating those buildings, is that working for us? We need to know what the housing stock is, where those units are. How many of those are specialized units for people with more intensive needs? How many of those units can be available very quickly? We have to do more assessment around that. We need to understand the financing and the resources in the community. And then we need communication with the neighbors, the community councils who are interacting with homeless folks, or the downtown businesses that are interacting with the homeless population. So it shakes out a little bit like this. We think, our hypothesis is there's probably between 200 and 400 people who are cycling through our homeless services in the downtown area in that one group of homeless adults. Families will have their own numbers, and we'll be working as we go forward with those population areas. But this is a depiction that we've started for the adult homeless service delivery system in Anchorage. Between 200 and 400 people. What we've done, starting with the point-in-time count, collaborating with the Homeless Coalition, we have been going out and collecting an assessment of people who are in the homeless service delivery system. So on the point-in-time count day, we did about 75 assessments. Each week from that time, we've collected additional assessments, and we now have, I think, 191 assessments in a common data system called the Housing Management Information System. Those assessments have this really super easy name. It's called the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Data Assessment Tool, or the VISPDAT as we call it, or sometimes just the Vulnerability Index. It tells us what the service needs for housing those individuals might be, which is our first thing. If we can get people into housing according to their service needs, we can then begin plugging in social services and doing what people know how to do in those funding streams. We can plug those into the people, and we can help them become successful and re-enter the community. So the Vulnerability Index helps us put people into rough groupings, and they're in the blocks on the left. The pink block, the Housing First block, are people who have more intensive needs, who will need a specialized service delivery approach that we saw with Carlick Manor and our Housing First projects, primarily through Rural Cap, but with other providers in the community now doing this approach. The middle group is, the yellow block, are people who are in shelter. They're staying there maybe a little bit longer than we would anticipate. They have some additional needs, but we need more time with them to assess whether that's a mental health service, whether that's substance abuse service, whether that's a disability that's preventing them from working. We need more time with those folks. And then there's a blue group of people at the bottom that are really pretty low service needs according to our assessment tool, and we need to just get them out of the system, back with some employment supports, back into stable housing, and we call that a rapid rehousing model. The far right column gives us the ideas. These blocks are not proportional according to what it looks like. Really what it looks like is a bell curve. You have the biggest group of people in the middle. That yellow group really is the largest group. We think it's about 55 or 60% of the people in our downtown services area that need a little more assessment to help us sort it out. the top group is between 25 and 30%. Those are our Housing First people. We actually, in some ways, this is the easiest thing for us to do because we've spent the past 3 years learning how to do it, becoming efficient. Rural Cap has led the way for us. They're experts at that. So that's almost, I know it's kind of funny, but that's almost the easy group. We know what to do. And it's cost efficient. It saves us a tremendous amount. When we look at the amount of expenditure going out, that top group probably uses 60 or 70% of the resources for our safety net. So that's one of the rationale for why we started there. We were really missing that skill set in our community. So we have it, Housing First rolling. We need to continue to support it. But now we need to go to the next group down and we need to start looking at, do those folks need a more technical approach like that, or do they just need some more treatment services? We'll talk a little bit later in the agenda about some of our alcohol treatment resources that we think might be really exceptionally useful in that level. And then the bottom percent, in some ways, we have the hardest time getting to them because our resources are really geared toward the top ends of the assessment tool. So the bottom folks, you will hear from staff down at Bean's Cafe, maybe 10 or a dozen people every day approach staff and say, is there anything for me? I don't have an addiction. I don't have a mental health issue. I just need a job. I need to get back out into community. And unfortunately, the way that some of the funding right now is geared, they're going to time into more severe services if we can't start getting the bottom of the list and moving them out quicker. So the strategy that we're pursuing is to work this list from both ends. There are some very technical state programs that are good programs for the top end. There's the Assertive Community Treatment Team, there's the Intensive Case Management program, and there are some other housing resources that we can just say, keep going, how do we support you, let's move, and then we can turn our attention, and perhaps one of the things that we'll talk about with the budget reallocation request is focusing a little more on this middle bubble and the bottom, some time-limited resources for the bottom of the assessment scale, moving those folks out of the community. Any questions on this slide before we go through it? We can come back to it because this is kind of a helpful diagram. This is a depiction of where we think those units need to be, and this is where I'm really excited that the committee might be a committee as a whole because those units could be across the community. The homeless individuals might come to certain parts of the community for resources, but housing is available across the whole community. So, good news. Housing's coming to all of us soon. Whether it be in scattered site or whether we need, another project that has a single site focus, that can be the work of discussion that goes forward and how these programs are arranged across the community. I think that's a strong conversation for us to have together. But scattered site, accessing the units that we need, that work can begin as we get resources in. So this is just our beginning ballpark of how many units we need and in what type of the area of the service needs. Okay.
So if there's about 430% need housing first, that's about 120 people, but you want 250 units, is that?
Yeah, and it's a little bit, there's 100 that are already existing, and we've been working really hard to make sure that those are shored up. So our Sitka Place project downtown is one of the key infrastructure resources that we would include in this count, so that's 50. And that project has been refilling with some of the folks with more intensive needs, and so I'm sort of counting that in my mind in our count of units. Probably it came online this summer, and it was almost going under, but then the mayor made the decision to infuse some resources. So that 50 is there. There's the Carlick Manor. It has 46 units. So some of those key infrastructures, those might not be new development. That could be counting existing infrastructure. I think the number probably is closer to 150, that bottom bullet there, of what we need out in the community. And that includes all of the folks, you know, we had some resources coming in through those very technical programs, the Assertive Community Treatment Program, Intensive Case Management Program for housing assistance, but we didn't have enough. And so this is part of our thinking that as those programs roll out, we've got to continue sort of working ahead of those, of the department, of the state, to identify those units and make sure that we have places for people to live.
Just, if I could jump in for a second, Mr. Chairman. You know, order of magnitude, the social cost of someone on the street here is about $50,000 to $60,000 per person. Those aren't all governmental costs, the overall social cost factored in externalities and such. If we can put together a housing first model, it shrinks to about $15,000 to $20,000 per individual. But that's a significant benefit to the community. So I just wanted to make sure that those numbers were in the conversation.
Mr. Delmer, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just, maybe I misunderstood what John was asking, but I think he was pointing out that is 150 the goal or is 250 the goal? For the top pink?
For total stock,
Yeah.
250.
250.
What's new? Maybe I misheard.
No,
the
no,
question.
because I think the math he did, it looked like on the previous page, there were about 120 people that were in that most extreme kind of circumstances. If you took 30% of 400, so 120 people
Oh, I
with
see.
250 total units.
Yes.
Is that because some people will go in and out, or why do you need 250 units to service, you know, between 100 and 150 people?
It's really a house.
Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yes. Mr.
So, we want to make sure that all participants, both the new assembly members and our previous ones, understand that when we talk about housing first, again, the other term that we use for that is permanent supportive housing. So some of the confusion that evolves over time is that will people move in and out of these apartments? Are they transitional? So whether they're scattered site all over Anchorage or an actual congregate living environment such as Carluck Manor, these are permanent rental units. So they contribute, the individual tenant contributes, but the success of Housing First is measured by how long a person is retained in their permanent supportive apartment. So we have 100 existing units, but what we need to add to that, because people are successfully staying in their housing, is 150 new units to accommodate the people that come into the system that have medical conditions, addiction, and they have chronic homelessness. So we want to make sure that we understand the terminology we're using, which is these are permanent supportive housing units, meaning they're permanent rental units with support.
So when someone is permanently settled at Carluck Manor, for example, they're no longer in that 200 or 400 count?
Right, they're already successfully housed, but of course we have new people coming into the system, but they're no longer utilizing the emergency systems the way they have used them before. In the research, et cetera, on Housing First, specifically on Carluck Manor, the reduction in use of, let's say, the safety center is about 85%. So that doesn't translate into less AFD or APD officers or support team, it just means that they're utilized differently. So, yes, we need more.
Mr. Training and Mayor?
And did we bring the housing line from stock for families?
I'm sorry?
We had some housing stock, didn't we, coming in?
The Safe Harbor project?
Right, did that come online?
That is
Yeah.
evolving, yes, that's HUD funded for the capital project as well as the current units that are there, which are transitional, but new units are being built to house families there. That's why the How restaurant
How
is.
many would that give us?
I think it's 21 units for
When do we
families,
look for that to come online,
probably within the next 2 years.
long term? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Two things. First of all, just anecdotally, when you talk to APD officers, they'll tell you that they were initially very skeptical about Carluck Manor, but they have been very impressed with the reduction in calls that they have to do regarding those individuals. And they tell me that they hardly ever go down, and it's anecdotal, but it's a pretty discrete section of the population. And unfortunately, I have to leave fairly shortly, but I wanted to take this time to thank you all for participating in this. Chair Evans for showing an interest in leadership on it, and also the team that's working not just with the municipality, but on the nonprofit sector. I think one of the strides we've been able to make over the last several months is bringing the community together and collectively addressing a problem that individual institutions were just treading water on it. The signs of progress are significant. We have a ways to go. The metric that I'm most concerned about, because metrics matter in all this, is how many people we have found shelter for, taking them off the street, and taking them out of the camps. And that's the prime focus. And so as this committee evolves, we're looking forward to working with you and soliciting new ideas, sharpening the ones that we've got going, because I think the potential for solving this issue is profound. You look at the experience in other communities, particularly in the lower 48 and across the world, they've been able to reduce their numbers significantly. Seattle, for example, they eliminated their sleep-off center because they just don't need it anymore. Salt Lake City is, in terms of what they've done with Housing First, is incredible. But this has got to be the kind of goals that we have here. I think the pressures that we might see in Anchorage are going to change as the state's fiscal situation evolves. They're talking about releasing more people from prison early as economics get tighter out in the far-flung reaches of the state. You're going to see more people who might need more services coming into our community, and we have to build the institutional capacity to not only absorb them, but make sure that they're able to become fully integrated members of this community. So those are my thoughts on it.
Thank you for attending, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. I understand when you have to leave. I just want to check, can people in the back hear us? No? Okay. If the speakers can try to raise your voice a little, we've got a pretty big room in the back, it's kind of difficult. Any other questions?
Okay, so I'll just, thank you, Mayor. I will just summarize the first questions we had, that your point is well taken. The math from this slide doesn't match the math from the other slide, and that, I think that, we'll clean that up. It does need to match. Part of what we'll be able to do is actually give real numbers. Once we have all of the vulnerability index for the folks, the goal is that this is an actual list with people's names. We know, exactly what those folks need. We're getting to know them. And so as we get better numbers, we'll make sure that this all kind of matches up. So in following or stealing, whichever you like, doing what Utah did, we are literally taking their model and bringing it here, which includes about 5 different steps. The first one is that step that I talked about coordinating outreach and assessment. The community members you see at the bottom, I'm sure I'm missing people because we've been gaining more and more folks wanting to work on this, wanting to work as a team together. Just yesterday in a meeting, someone was saying, I really appreciate coming here every Tuesday at 3 because when I'm out on the street and I talk with somebody and I can't provide their services, I can bring that to this group and I can say, I'll bring you the right person that you need. And that's the idea. We want to actually move that timeline down so that we're all there together when we're doing the outreach on the street, or that one person is able to help coordinate that effort. There's also a federal funding push through HUD and Carmen Wenger and the Homeless Coalition and the United Way. We have all been having conversations about how do you coordinate entry into the system, not just for the homeless adults, but for families and all of the other people in that first slide. How do you do that in a way that is better use of our money, saves our time? You don't have to have case managers running out and back on the street trying to find people who've now moved. It is just it's a really great part that's moving forward with all of us pushing together. And we've been able to partner with United Way. Greg Newman is here, and he's been specifically helping me figure out how the mayor can best support the community members and move that forward. The second one is the piece that we need to start now working on. What are the units? What are those specialized units that Melinda was talking about? Where are the units that we can afford to provide additional support services and additional rental subsidy for people? We know that when people receive 3 legs of the stool for successful services, a unit, a rental subsidy, or some assistance, they pay part of their income, and then an assistance comes in, and then flexible social services wrapped around them. We know that we can achieve 80% stability in housing, no matter what their prior homeless episode was. So in Seattle, at Carlick Manor, other projects, we've taken people who've had multiple years of homelessness on the street, and now they've been stable for years on end in housing because of this formula. So it drives us to focus not only on what can social services do for the person. We do need social services to do some specific things, but we also need to know that it comes in a configuration that helps the person become successful and saves us money in the end. If we have a unit for someone to go into, they will stabilize quicker. They will be able to reduce their drinking by 30%, is what most of the housing programs show. It's engagement services. I describe this housing as ongoing engagement so that the person can then move into the formal treatment services that the community has available. It's the most efficient use of our dollars, and it drives us to make sure that all of our social service programs are matched up with housing. That's an easier thing to say than to do, because housing comes in its own way, it has its own timeline. You have landlords, you have social service programs that have their own timing, their own restrictions. And so really it's that front matchmaking that's going to make us successful. We're just about to kick off the housing team on the adults action agenda, and then we'll be able to get a better count on those numbers. What are our resources available? Where do we need to do development? Where do we need to go from here? The next one is we need people to be stable in those units. We need them to be able to afford it. We need those rental subsidies to go for other people. You know, we need to move people back into community integration in the most tangible way that we can, and that's by helping people become economically stable. Some people will qualify for a disability resource from the federal government. Helping them get that certification is an important piece of what case managers do with people once they're in housing. Some people want to start working, but maybe can only work part-time. And some people, we just need them to regain a reason to wake up every morning. And so we might start with volunteer service or some community engagement. That leads to economic stability, because the more the person invests in the housing and what we're doing together, the more successful they will be. It's just like with anybody from our families or our personal lives. It's the same thing. We all need a reason to wake up every day. The next thing we need to do is to shore up our safety net. I'm actually going to go change that one slide. I'm going to make this yellow bubble proportionate, because right now what's happening for our shelter providers, and we have Lisa Aquino here who's probably singing along with us, on our shelter is just overwhelmed. There's too many people in the shelter. We have so much overflow. There's so many people in a dense area. It's hard to engage with people. You just end up doing crowd control most of the time. And if we can work that list to the middle, then what we're doing is we're helping our shelter providers do what they do best, which is engage people and help them receive case management to move back into community. And so we're trying to right-size the shelter system. And that's part of the infrastructure realignment that we need to do. We need daytime services added. We need vocational opportunities. We need some of those opportunities for people to want to wake up. We need those coming into the shelter. We can do volunteer activities for the community over the summer. There are all kinds of things that we can do, and those provide us with the opportunity to engage the person around, where do you see yourself going next? How can we help you get to that vision? How can we help you be the captain of that plan? And these activities and these things going on in the downtown area are what will help us get there.
you, on that last point, reconfigure spaces in downtown area?
So in the downtown area, we have the shelter, we have Beans Cafe, we have Downtown Soup Kitchen, we have the Sleep Off, and we have Anchorage Community Mental Health has a building at 4th and Juneau. And one of the things we've just started to work with, we've convened the directors of all of those organizations a few times. We haven't met for a little bit here in the spring, but a few times asking, is there a way that we can really line up those, the chain of events according to the person's calendar? So Sleep Off lets off a little bit before Beans opens for breakfast. Brother Francis has to do certain things because of the way that they're configured. And so we end up with these times where there's a lot of people without the next thing to do. And so we'd like to use resources to line up those things so that the person's schedule flows. And we don't have these downtimes where people are maybe wandering up into business areas or the neighborhood, and we can help our surrounding business owners and neighbors in that way by programming the space, if you will. We need more medical coordination. We need some intervention points identified. All of these things go into that, looking at the schedule and really sort of mapping out according to what is the person's schedule who's in these service delivery systems. How are they getting their core needs met? How can we align things so that's streamlined and that they can get those needs met? I'll just give one thing we found. There was a formal evaluation of the Housing First program at Carlick Manor and Fairbanks, and there are some things that are going on to finalize that information. But one of the points that came out of our study and other studies are people who have unaddressed medical needs, and people who are hungry in the morning will drink more, and that's not necessarily rocket science. But if you're drinking to manage pain from a dental or a medical problem, or you're drinking because that's the first thing you need on your stomach in the day, placing interventions in those points in itself can reduce some of those activities, some of the drinking and some of those behaviors. And so that's why we find it a really important thing to look at how our system is structured. And so then the next thing is this tying all of the needed resources together. One of the things that happens for people is, oh, my rental assistance comes from this agency over here, my social services come from this agency over here, my medical comes from this agency over here. They might have 7 different appointments that they have to go to just get started. And at the point when people are least engaged, I guess I could say, or still trying to figure out if this can work, there are the most things for them to do. And so as a community, what Utah did, what other places did, was they streamlined all of that. They brought that together so that one person or one process can get you into all of those funding streams with you making one appointment rather than you having to go to 7 different appointments throughout your day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how do you handle rent when folks don't have a job? Because you talk about rental assistance. What if they don't have a job? How do you handle that?
Some people, if a person has some federal assistance through SSI, everybody pays a percentage of their income is the first rule. 30% of your income, no matter what it is, you pay in. And then the rental assistance is built around that. A lot of programs will set a minimum, $50, and people can come up with $50. Oftentimes, maybe Melinda could speak more about what happened in actual housing programs, but you can create those opportunities for people to earn the money to pay the rent.
Thank you.
And with that understanding that people will buy into it, people will invest in it personally, financially, when you can set up programs that give them real opportunities to do that. And that's what Housing First is, and that's what it does. So then, for the dashboard and for the work of hopefully this committee that we will do over time is look at these results. We want to look at, did we house 300 people? We just chose 300 because it's somewhere in the middle of this ballpark estimate that we have. You know, we started there. Hopefully our economic times won't make us have to move that number up. Hopefully we'll find that we're successful, we're moving the number, we're already driving that dial down. We want to be able to show that to the committee, and as the chair said, if we see changes, let's analyze it, what's happening, how do we address it? 100 people over the course of the next 3 years is what we've set as our goals for the adult area. Stability in housing, we want to see those results that we've seen in Carlick Manor. We want 80% stability or above. I think we can exceed that. I think that we're getting better at what we do. Our providers are really skilled. I think we'll do better than that. We want to track the hours of employment and work that people have contributed, and we can also track the number of hours that have gone back into the community in terms of volunteer service. I think that would be a helpful thing for the community to see and to embrace. And then there are some clinical goals that we want to see people stabilizing in the units. We want to see those same outcomes that we saw in terms of improved mental health functioning, improved medical access, and those are all some technical goals that are tracked in the state programs that we can monitor alongside them. Also, speaking to the use of shelter, 50-to-1 is a national best practice according to our colleagues at Catholic Social Services doing the research. We'd like to approximate that. We're at about 125-to-1 right now. So we'd like to see that become more in line with what helps the shelter do what they do best. Monitoring the community resources. I have a slide coming up about how we think we might be able to engage the community in supporting people. Mental health case management services, you hear from the community all of the time that I saw someone in mental health crisis. I called and there's just nobody available to come, and it's in large part because the mental health caseloads that case managers have runs probably double that, 70 or 90-to-1. It's a symptom of a system that hasn't had adequate resources for quite some time, and so we, as a community, we sort of see the impacts of that. And then my favorite bullet is the bottom one, that I would love to see people housed within 3 months would be an initial benchmark I would like to see. We're closer to 6 months right now. Or 1 to 2 weeks would be ideal. And 1 to 2 weeks will happen once we get ahead of the curve and we're able to know where those housing units are. We have the resources identified in advance. And when we encounter someone, we engage them. As soon as they say yes, we say, I have a unit for you. It's right over here. Would you like to go see it? That's how we get to 2 weeks.
Back it up a page, you said 80% of people stable. What's 80% of what people?
80% of the people who go into the housing program remain in the housing program for more than 1 year.
So it'd be like 80% of the 400?
Yes.
Yeah, it's something I haven't seen on the list is the role of education. Certainly for families with younger kids, it's stabilizing for us. So they get into a school, they may stay there. But if they're moving around from house to house, that becomes a big problem. But for young adults as well, the stabilizing. Is there any coordination with education institutions, or is that a resource we have tapped into?
The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, the United Way, had a work group focusing on family homelessness for many years now, and we've actually achieved a tremendous amount with that work. This year began our 4th year of no family that came to the attention of the emergency shelter providers who contacted the shelter. There was not a family that had to sleep in their car or in a place that wasn't meant for sleeping, like outside. because our church is partnered with the service delivery system, and we have the cold weather shelter system specifically for families. And that in itself is a tremendous, that is a win. This system is describing the adult homeless service delivery system. I would really very much like to dedicate one of the committee meetings to talking about family homelessness, and then the youth homelessness parallels a lot of this work that I'm describing here, but has that connection to employment as well. So I would say that yes, we're working with those entities. We need some more time to update the committee on where that's going. There is some new interest in taking that work to the next level and looking, I think the steps that we've outlined here, finding people, sorting out what their needs are, finding the house, knowing where the housing is around the community, stabilizing the response system. The formula fits each of those grouping of homeless population areas. We just need to put together the next framework, and the United Way is the lead for that in the community, along with the Homeless Coalition.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, then Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I actually think it's a really great idea to eliminate these 6 or 7 or how many ever different appointments that the homeless person needs. Connect the person up with one provider, an individual, so they know they have one person to contact if they have a problem, instead of trying to figure out which one of this half a dozen agencies that they have to go to solve their problem. I think that is a fantastic idea, because they can build a relationship with that particular person, and I think we have a much better chance of being successful in the long run with a program like that.
The piece, I'll just say one quick piece about that. The thing that backs that up is the fact that funders come together in those communities and have a collaborative and, say, this is my piece, working with a coordinator who is the one who organizes how all that money comes in, because each stream has their own requirement and need. And so, the funders in the room today, this is a really great partnership, because we now understand maybe a little bit more about how that might come together as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Green.
Thanks, Jim. Nancy, how does the rescue mission enter into this? Because I don't see them anywhere in your program. Yet I know there are people they house there.
Yeah.
And they've got long-term program. So how does that feed into your program?
It's a really good point. They're a little bit missing right now, and I've played a little bit of phone tag with their director, Dave, and haven't been able to connect with them. They, I think, tend to work a little bit more in that yellow bubble area, the one that we're going to get to, and have, their way of approaching things and their requirements, but they will be a critical partner when we get to that mid part of the bell curve.
Because I know over the years we've worked with Melvin, I've worked with them. They've been very, very responsive to our communities.
Yeah, they're a little bit missing, and that's on me. I need to make sure to double that.
Let us know if we can help you with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yes, before you get started, at some point when it's a convenient break for you, I'm going to take about a few minute breaks so people can get food and stuff. So just whenever
Okay.
that works out for you.
I think we're just about done with this, and then that might be a natural point.
Mr. Bender?
Sorry, did you just go back one slide?
I just moved forward.
Oh, I'm sorry, just wrong place. I know you don't have good data yet, but what percent do you estimate of our chronic homeless population is Alaska Native?
I would say 80%, 75.
75 to 80%. And when you were talking about the reasons to get up in the morning and activities that go beyond just work perhaps, what efforts do you plan or have you done, or what agencies have been helping you in making some of those activities culturally relevant? Things that perhaps a person from rural Alaska who's Alaska Native would respond to?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's also a piece that's sort of out there for us to really solidify. There are groups who are working in that area, the Forget Me Not group. Rural Cap has been our lead as our housing provider for a reason. They are a tribally run organization, and from from being over at the Mental Health Trust Authority for a long time, I think the approach that they use is really wise, that it's not for me to say, what is going to be that right activity. We need to bring together the partners so that they can access each other and the resources. And so CITC and South Central Foundation will be key partners in helping us figure that out. The Forget Me Not group is really working in that vein, if you will, and making sure that that's a part of what we do to facilitate those relationships. So the next one is the beginning of our metrics and starting to look toward what the mayor's action agenda would like to portray and to communicate to the assembly. And so there's a big draft on this document because we also want to hear if there are things the assembly wants to see that are not included here. And we're also working to overlay these data measures with what the Coalition to End Homelessness is doing on the broader plan. So we'll be linking all of these dashboards, if you will. And eventually, I think all of this work will come together and we'll have one plan and we'll all be on one document or page. But we've now kind of got we haven't quite braided everything together. So we're moving forward. This work came about through the open data program. So the Bloomberg Foundation has been meeting with the administration, and we've started with the housing focus area because it's a little bit out ahead of some of the other mayoral priorities. Looking at what other communities have conveyed about homelessness, checking what Utah did. I really, really appreciate Hennepin County in Minnesota. They have done a really wonderful dashboard that wraps things up. And so this is the beginning of the metrics and how it sort of breaks out. The coloration didn't quite come through on the slide, but this is that pink bubble that's the more intensive service needs. It's kind of brown or beige on the slide. The yellow bubble is for the middle part of the assessment groupings, and then the blue bubble. And so just thinking about interventions are specific to people's needs and how do we move them along. This is a sample chart that how Los Angeles depicted their number going down. But one of the things that I really like is this one, not so much as Hennepin County. I'm a little bit worried about just the idea that we portray to the community that there are 300 people and we housed them and it was simple and it was easy and it happened in 2 weeks after we started, without really finding a way to portray all of the work that needed to go into getting us there, because that's sustainability. If the community understands we need, this centralized process, we need the players in the right place, then that lives beyond any person sitting in any of our seats right now. And so that's a really important part of what I want to make sure we convey. And so this is a really beginning concept of how we're beginning to think that the blue group of people, no, I'm coloring people, but the people who require less intervention to move from homelessness may very well connect right in with faith-based or community groups for those social connections that are also about sustainability. To the extent that we can help people have genuine relationships and social connections in the community is the extent to which our dollars will be best used, and they won't cycle back into homelessness. So we have about 4 different faith-based community groups that have approached us and said, how can we help you? We want to do something. So we're beginning the process of talking about how we might implement training and organization for those faith-based and community groups, that they might actually have a committee within their organizations that could be a mentoring kind of group or a partner to someone who's transitioning from homelessness. This idea will probably work much better with families, but I think we'll start with some of those bottom of the vulnerability index list adults and see what we can learn working with adults. that's the end of the slides and the background. I think the next place on the agenda is I have a draft of the metrics that, to sort of walk you through, and discussion of a project that might be coming through from the state capital process, but maybe we want to take a break and have some pizza.
Yeah, let me see if there's any questions first on this part of the presentation, and then we'll take our break. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, one more thing that I didn't see in the conversation, but I know is part of it, is immigrant populations. I know Catholic Social Services does a lot with that. State Department helps fund, with the school district, language skills get taught and get integrated in the community. And I just wondered where they are in the mix, or where what they do is in the mix in terms of trying to stabilize.
I think there's probably another ring, if you will, that is prevention. And at least I think of those folks who are on the edge of falling into homelessness as being in that prevention sort of category. And from our work, we're sort of focusing on the people that are in the system right now and haven't built out the model to incorporate that prevention. But I know that United Way has done a tremendous amount of work through 211 and Catholic Social Services with us. And so I think the family system has a little more bandwidth in terms of that prevention view. And we can definitely incorporate that.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I recall, sometime in one of our meetings prior, there was talk of creating a vets village somewhere. Has that been started? Is it finished? What stage of development is it in right now?
I have been following that project for several years, and I think that the capacity and the vision for the project is wonderful. It's exceptional. I think the logistics of getting the property and getting all of the capital infrastructure is taking longer than that group would have liked. But I believe there are some maybe some new partnerships and some new developments that might be coming forward in the next couple of months that can help anchor the services component. And of course, the vets have people in each of the groupings that we've described here, and it depends on which group you want to serve, how much of that service delivery you need in the project. So I think it's still in the development phase and making some progress at least.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that? Is there a role that we, as the assembly or the city or the community, has or could take to help that project go forward? The Vets Village project specifically.
I think there's always something the assembly could do. Well, since you asked, I think thinking about the programs and I think about development for housing and programs in terms of the area median income. We have a number of housing providers and our nonprofit housing providers, and a number of work within sort of a medium band of affordability. And those groups need assistance. There was an entire work group sort of facilitated with our partners at Rasmussen and United Way around what's needed. There are recommendations that came out of that work group that I think we could highlight in this committee as well. And then there's this band below that's 50% of area median income and below. Those would be all of the people that I group in my former brain as mental health trust beneficiaries, people with disabilities, people who are going to need a long-term support. Those projects really struggle without subsidies. And so, if the community began to look at how can we prioritize or incentivize development at all of those levels, it would help a project like the Vet Village, and it would help, the Carlick Manor projects, the Sitka Place projects, but also the affordable units for people who are in that prevention, that next ring of, at risk of falling into homelessness. So tax breaks, those kinds of things, assistance with development fees, any of those, communities have used a lot of strategies around that.
Are there any quick questions from the public before we take a quick break and then move on to the next subject? Chris?
For Nancy. Nancy, could you describe for the group what the current threats are to the current housing stock that's being utilized by the system?
What's happening in our service delivery system is that this view of tying everything together is not typical. We just don't think about it that way. There's housing in a community, there's services, and the work of trying to bring those two pieces together is challenging. And it can appear, I think, to some of our colleagues at the state that there's constant crisis in looking at the funding for the people in those lower income, and that happens to be true because the funding isn't set in stone. It isn't a sure thing for housing providers. So we have some services that come out of the state Department of Health and Social Services that need housing paired with them and don't have all of the resources to do that. And so that burden goes to the service provider. Well, you'll just have to figure it out. Well, good luck in a community that has a 2% vacancy rate and a one-bedroom unit costs $1,021. Figuring it out is no longer an option. I think maybe for a long time, service providers have been savvy. They've been good at that. But now the pressure is just too high and they can't figure it out. And so those really technical services are not, we can't keep going in that way. We have to pair these. We have to be able to know what that stock is so that we can make the best use of those state dollars. And so right now there's a big pinch. There's a huge pinch in the community on figuring out how to keep those housing units going for those services to flow into. And there's quite a bit of tension between the local community and the state around it. Is that fair?
Anything else? Hey, why don't we take a very quick, no longer than 10-minute absolutely break. There's pizza available, help yourselves, and then we'll get started again with the rest of the presentation. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I need to.
That's true.
Yeah, I wanted
Okay, great. Would it be possible to decide to consider security guards volunteering working somebody? It's not really voluntary, but the person is making a drug, being an officer, something like that. And that's a productive use of their time. I think that's something that we should good measure. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure you did.
We have
Anything you need to adjust?
No, I think it's going well.
Maybe that's I don't think we necessarily need to like go in deep, but just so people get a feel for the types of measures.
Perfect, and then these are the ones that there's other things they want to know about. That was your description.
And they typically leave the shelter because they don't.
How they're all kind of coming together.
So what are we putting in place?
Work towards that.
Okay, good. A quicker update might be like, so I just want somebody to know because if it goes through, we can actually get everything ready for the redevelopment. So we could send that through a upcoming assembly meeting.
That's good for them. And also, first quarter budget amendment, the 430,000, whatever, and how that ties into some of the things we were talking about, coordination. That
And at least keeping it in the conversation because I really
just so they know that when that comes up, that Tuesday, the thing that's going
and they miss that rent is $1,000. And your first time hearing about this person typically is a single mom.
Yes.
It's not, no, those are families,
Right. Yeah.
That's the other thing. But she'll end up with system. She has the system. Yeah. And I think that's just because, like I said, he's just saying that underneath here that everyone needs to have this.
Right. No, that's right.
And I'm sure the weather there as a service provider for neighborhood services for the last right, that really and the other piece is just making sure everybody gets close to hardware. How long that stabilization takes with mental health and substance abuse treatment, you might have, you know, that's not right to work. No. And what that really means, that when you have domestic housing, everyone knows that so all of these layers of complexity because I'm listening to the
But you're talking about the same similar issues, but it's mainly about releasing releasing people back into the environment.
No, I haven't.
You know this guy.
Recovery coordinators, but not for their active recovery coordinator, which is a key.
you see it both?
Hey, everybody. Get your last minute food and head back, and we'll get started again, so we don't run out of time. Now Ms. Burke is going to take us into the next area. Go. Okay, Nancy, the floor is yours.
Next up, I have something really exciting, which will not go very well on the screen, but I'm just going to put it in this sort of close-up area.
And please, since everybody's eating, it's even louder in here, so talk up as much as you can, please.
Sure. You can hear me over your chewing. What we literally want is a dashboard that will give us the data points that will show how we're doing. And this also has on it a big, oh, it's not on this document, a draft. I mean, this is the draft of what we're just beginning to kind of put some thinking around what are those data points we want to see. So I've mapped out 3 different groupings of metrics that are the first ones to start with in thinking. And so remember, this is about adult homelessness. This is a little more focused on the shelter and camp and street, the outreach component. A little bit less about the infrastructure of those services, but more on that process, the formula, if you will, of let's find people, let's figure out what their needs are, let's figure out where the units are, and let's get them moved into housing. And so, the mayor, pretty early on, we picked the number 300, so we're going to stick with that number, 100 people per year. And from that, we want to see that campsites will be reduced. We have some ways of tracking, the goal would be to have outreach services increase, have contacts that can be available when community members are engaging with people in camps. This year, this is pretty high on my mind with the fire danger that we've had. We really need to make sure that we're focusing on reducing risk to major burns getting away from us. So APD is our partner in this. They have a process for noticing camps and closing camps. We're tracking all of that in that Tuesday meeting when the outreach workers meet. I don't think I mentioned that the CAP team has been joining us. And in fact, they facilitated our meeting for the first month and a half just to help us understand what they're doing. And I think Josh Noller was here and he might have had to go.
He's back there.
So thank you to the CAP team. They've been a tremendous partner in this work, and I think we're starting to see some of the benefits. We did not find as many people in camps during our winter count as I thought that we would. The camp number I do know because we did the canvas and we were able to do the interviews on our phone this year. It was really pretty fun and innovative idea that came to us from AWWU and from our GIS services that we might be able to use GIS to help us know where we're interacting with people. So we had a homeless survey that 190 volunteers, not all those volunteers did the survey, but we had 190 people canvass the community on January 26th. We found about 90 people in camps or on the street during that count. And we think that's a pretty solid number. We had 22 grids in the community where we had volunteers going. And so that's was much lower. I was expecting 150 easily. So that I think we're starting to see some of the outcomes of some of the changes that we've already begun to make. So CAP team stepping up and engaging camps, service providers pairing with them to help engage people out of camp and into shelter or into housing. We'll keep working that.
Are we seeing an increased amount of camps or decreased amount of camps? 90 people if there's 90 camps. public perceives as they're everywhere. And we see
Yes.
reduction in a lot of camps.
I can't really answer that question. I think that's the next piece I'd like to see if we can't use GIS mapping to help us understand. I haven't really figured out how we're gonna do this yet, but one of the problems is the camps move. People move from camp to camp, so a camp will be noticed, the people will move out. And we don't always have that paired with cleanup of a camp. And I will say there's a winter strategy and then there's a summer strategy. And I think people are seeing the camps that might be left over from winter. Because in the winter, if you have people that aren't prepared to be camping out and they don't have resources to go, they're likely to die on the street. So some of the camps remain over the winter. And now it's time to start going through and refocusing on getting those cleaned up. So I can't really answer the callers when they're calling the mayor's office too. There's a camp, come and clean it out. You know, are there people there? We don't always know if it's an active camp or an inactive camp.
Thank
We have an opportunity, I think, to help with those numbers. We've got citywide cleanup coming up, and that means people are going to be down in the watersheds and looking for those types of things. And if we encourage some type of reporting system or something.
That's a really good idea. Yes. Yes.
And they're also at risk of losing their possessions if they're there.
Yes.
Just because you brought it up, do we track how many people die on the street each season or each year? Do we have a sense of about what that number is each winter?
We don't. And you know, our general feeling is it's reducing, in part because one of the things we also don't talk as much as we really should about is the fact that through the state's some of the state programming efforts and the work of our nonprofits, since last fall, we've housed about, or will have housed about 70 or 80 people through these technical programs that started with the assertive community treatment team and the intensive case management. And so people who are in housing, we also know that people pass away in the housing because of the stage of their disability that they're in. But we don't really have a good way to count. Beans Cafe keeps track of people that they see and they know have died, but it's only the people that they know have died. They don't really know if a person went back to another community or if they're deceased. You know, if somebody's not there, they don't know how to count that all the time. But they keep a list of how many people. Do you know what that? Oh, you do. Do you know how many, like, what the numbers have been?
It really depends. Like 100, more than 100. Well, no, that's not true. Every year we read all the names at both for the cancer shelters, the ceremony, and then the instance of ceremony. And I don't know off the top of my head, maybe it's 50 or something.
50 or 60.
Yeah. But I think that's everyone that knew, not necessarily on the street. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so then there are those that are dying from exposure on the street and those that are.
And people end up going to hospitals, so you wouldn't count them as dying on the streets. I mean, people passed away and continue to pass away at Carlock Manor, but the response from the community and family members is at least that those individuals have died with dignity and with people caring for them. So actually people dying on the street, that's mostly anecdotal information. You can figure out how to find it though.
And that's one thing to keep in mind. As Nancy is going through these metrics, and this is starting place. If there are specific statistics that you want to have incorporated into this, let us know, and we can work on getting that into part of the dashboard. There's specific things you want to see measured, if we can measure it. Ms. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Nancy, you said that you counted somewhere around 90 people in January. Was Beans completely, were the shelters maxed out? How many were in the shelters plus the 90 that night? That would actually be the total number, right?
Yes. And that's the rolled up number that we'll get from the Homeless Coalition once they're that count works is everyone who hits services on that day is counted. And we try to count people who might not be coming in. And so then all those data points have to be unduplicated to make sure that we're just getting the count, not duplicating. And that takes time to kind of roll through and sort out. But a note about the people who aren't coming in, we know that we'll always have people, particularly along the waterways, because a person who's maybe had a brain injury or has mental health issues is very unlikely to be in the setting where there's lots of density in the shelter. There are just some people who are not going to go to shelter. And so that's one reason for having kind of a two-pronged approach, the outreach approach and the shelter approach. Everyone we can get to go into shelter because we're trying to tie all the resources to that location, we will. But some of those folks we need to just get straight from camp into housing. And then, because that's all they can tolerate.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so just to say, this is kind of where we're starting. These are not necessarily surprising benchmarks that we want to use. Campsites reduced. We want Anchorage to be a place that's welcoming and a good community for all of us, including our business owners. We don't want them to have to deal with some of the cleanup that happens. Our neighbors, we don't want people to be afraid for the kids in the neighborhoods. The goal is to make this a place where everybody can live and be neighbors together. Happy community. I also don't want to get so many indicators that we're measuring every little thing. So to the extent that we can get indicators that are nice roll-ups of things, so this 80% stability in housing tells us, or the length of time in housing is one of the big ones that we used to use in the housing programs at the Trust, because that tells me that the person's engaged in their housing, they're probably having improved mental health outcomes, they're probably not drinking so that they make their landlord angry and get evicted. That's a nice roll-up of a bunch of things. So I think the exercise will be to work with the community partners on all of the details that we might want to see out of the initiative, and then see what's feasible and what we might roll up into other ones and present those out to the community. So I think maybe we'll just kind of cruise through these and then use this as a working document for committee members to provide input, and then bring it back as we get more details around it, if that's good. So we're looking at the vulnerability index, using that as an organizing tool for the community to house the 300, reducing campsites, interactions with for our downtown folks. The downtown partnership ambassadors will be a key partner in that area. Looking at the shelter use, Anchorage Safety Center, like the mayor said, when Seattle opened their Housing First program at 1811 East Lake, they actually were able to close the sleep-off center that was adjacent to that housing program.
Mr. Train, any questions?
Ma'am, shelters at or below capacity, what shelters are we talking about?
That would be all of the shelters. So that would be Brother Francis, that would be Rescue Mission.
So you're getting the rescue missions numbers into this?
Yes, we will get them in, yes.
Because I appreciate that, because sometimes you forget that each shelter was.
Absolutely, a lot of people, yes.
Thank you.
Safety center reductions, looking at how many people did we house. The mayor's really good about asking this question, how many people did we house this week? And breaking it out according to the different intervention levels. So how many of the top percentage of folks, how many of the middle, how many of the lower percentage of folks. And then looking at this question, there's a kind of an X on the units number, because we still are working on getting those numbers in. So the next metrics would be around the person and how we can demonstrate that they're stable in housing. We don't want people just going into housing and not being supported. That's not going to end in that kind of community that we're looking for. We want them to be in the housing, having services that they need, and moving forward in their engagement in the community. So looking at tenant stability, how many of the folks are economically stable in the units? They need to be able to afford it either through employment or resources that can stabilize their housing through disability income. We need rental subsidies. People just can't afford, even if you're working at our new minimum wage, your gross is $20,000 roughly, and your apartment's gonna be $12,000. So already you're paying more than 50% of your income just on maintaining your rent. Now, there are some things that we might look at doing, like a roommate program or some way to buy down the cost of that rent. Maybe people want to rent a unit together. Those options can become available. I mean, I think we have to do some new creative things. Looking at the services that can come in for people, do we have enough of the services? Are we able to offer alcohol treatment, substance abuse treatment, mental health services? Those are the big ones, but also employment services. I'm a huge fan of a program in Vermont that when they work with people with really intensive needs, they make sure that they pair it with IT training and computers, because that is a really solitary kind of employment option for people. And so their assertive community treatment team actually gives everybody they work with a laptop, and they try to do engagement through that medium so that people are learning a skill as they're receiving a service. Ideas like that, those are things that we need to pursue. Looking at those social supports like we talked about. And then the last grouping of metrics is around the community resources that our shelters, we're looking at our shelters, staffing ratios, the ratio of mental health service providers. Can we have a responsive service delivery system for community? Looking at how long people are homeless and trying to set some goals around that we would have a system that could actually move somebody through homelessness. I put 100 days. I haven't even mentioned that to Lisa yet. She's seeing that for the first time. But we'll work on it. It is an average. And then looking at how the service system, how we're able to tie those resources together is what that last one is about, having transition coordinators, making sure that the person can have all of those resources tied into one door, if you will, for the system. So that's the beginning. We'll find a way to put this on a website that assembly members can monitor. We'll be able to report in the numbers once we decide on what we want them to be, and it should be an information tool for use in your decision-making processes.
The metrics? One question I had, Nancy, and I don't know if it's possible, but one of the concerns I've had throughout this is whether we'll be able to measure, as Anchorage provides resources and starts kind of tackling this issue. If I'm concerned, we're going to create sort of an attraction to Anchorage, where now that Anchorage is housing homeless people come from other places where they're not, to Anchorage, and at the same time we're having this economic downturn of sorts, which could be generating our own people moving into the homeless situation. Is there any sort of ability that we'll be able to sort of track that to see if we are getting new people in from the bush or other places in Alaska, or if there's a growth, is it just internal? Because I think it'd be important to know that.
I think that our overall count numbers will help us. And in the survey that we did this year, we inserted 3 questions about how long have you been in Anchorage? Is Anchorage your home? How long have you been here? Were you homeless when you came to Anchorage? To try to get some data around that. And I can say that of the 90, I can only speak to the outreach part because I helped head that up. I think it was 11 people responded that they were not from Anchorage. So as of right now, self-report, people are saying, no, they're from Anchorage, which I know Juneau found 2 years ago. They did a similar thing where they asked that question, are you from Juneau? And the vast majority of people were from Juneau. But just sort of looking forward, the governor announced his interest in housing and shoring up these resources for all communities. And I think to the extent that our voices can be joined to the group of people saying, yes, please, that's important because, our systems are really overtaxed as they are. If other communities aren't able to make it, that it creates problems. I think that Juneau and Fairbanks and Anchorage are sort of in some part of their brains preparing for that possibility. Juneau just hired or brought on a homeless services coordinator, sort of along the lines of what Anchorage did. And I think that actually presents an opportunity for us to collaborate together as communities, more hub communities, to help shore up, what we're doing. But also maybe even presenting the idea that we can reach out to some of our surrounding communities. Like we've reached out to the Mat-Su Valley to see where can we partner and where can we make sure that people are able to find resources in their home communities. And that's sort of a long-winded response of saying, yeah, I know.
Fair enough. You got 22 more minutes, so please roll on.
There's no more questions around the matrix. I think one of the topics that'll come up in the next weeks or so is this topic of the amendments that were requested. And we have some groupings of ideas around that. And so if the assembly members have questions about what we're thinking, just to sort of sum up, the first quarter budget reallocation requests are those tools that we want to use to get started on some of this work of realigning the downtown campus and shoring up what we have there. So the top bullet of looking at $150,000 to do that work, and then the balance of the funds looking at some other ways that we can move forward with implementing the next steps of this work. So it might include programming for those employment services, or to try to coordinate the resources through the places where people are coming. Brother Francis, Anchorage Community Mental Health, 4th and Juneau location, Downtown Soup Kitchen, and looking how to pair those folks out with housing. We really like the idea of the Albuquerque used, where they had a van that they drove around, and the people that were panhandling or who were not engaged, finding out if they would like to do service projects or activities, and then engaging them through that activity and work. We think that particularly focusing on panhandling might be an effective strategy. It seemed to work in Albuquerque. And then shoring up our outreach for engagement in the camps throughout the summer. So I wanted to just give you the sort of pair it to the presentation so that you know when you see those requests coming forward, if you have further questions or thoughts about it.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So back to this Albuquerque idea. So they have a van, they drive around to pick up people who are panhandling, and they have somebody who's looking for day labor, and they go drop them off to give them, to work for that day. Is that the plan?
Yes.
That might work. I mean, if you have somebody that's looking for those kind of people to do some work for them.
Yeah. Yes. And then they have something to, help with a resume and some reason to wake up tomorrow, Yep.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're just cruising through agenda items then. So the last part of our formal agenda that we had was around the 2020 budget. And I think that, as I said, we have some ideas around what we want to do. And so I wanted to just give you the pair it to the presentation so that you know when you see those requests coming forward, if you have further questions or thoughts about it.
Mr.
there's a capital allocation that has been in the Department of Health and Social Services capital section for the last 5 years, and it's targeted toward increasing our capacity to provide substance abuse treatment at the center that's currently the Clitheroe Center. And it's an old appropriation that really was originally tied to the Bring the Kids Home initiative through the state, but the purpose of it has always been to increase inpatient treatment capacity for services. And so through a process, and some of you might remember some of the work to try to cite where we might improve alcohol services at the Raspberry Court location when the government was sending that property out. The municipality did a fair amount of work in doing pre-development and concepts of what those services might look like. And through that process found that the airport had selected the runway location that they needed, and that there was no plans for further airport development on the site that the current Clitheroe Center is located, and that there is in fact land there. So during the last year of the Sullivan administration, the Mental Health Trust and the Department of Health and Social Services and partners worked with the administration to try to move that project forward, and we didn't hit the place where it was able to go at that time. But now, with the mayor citing access to services as part of this goal and part of the work, it's an opportunity now that we have. And so the Mental Health Trust is interested in helping us with carrying that forward. We want to look at the array of services that might complement what's happening in the community. And so that budget allocation is going through a process right now to have a reappropriation around adding the word construction. Because it's an older appropriation, we never actually realized that it didn't say construction in it. It said pre-development and design is for $5 million, and so that would be a considerable amount of pre-development and design. But in fact, we might actually get quite a distance into reconfiguring the services that are in the existing building in a facility that'll be much more functional, and the existing facility is very poor quality and really probably needs to be demolished. So that appropriation should be making its way through the end of session. We scheduled this meeting on the 20th thinking that'll be after legislative session ends, and we'll be able to sort of give the story on that. So we'll have to just have a cliffhanger for the end of the story at the next meeting, but it may come through an assembly meeting to accept the pre-development funds to get started in looking at that.
Any questions on that, Mr. Training?
How many beds at Clitheroe Center are you envisioning?
I think that's
Right now, we've only got the Ernie Turner Center.
Yes, for detox.
Yeah.
Yes, and so the Clitheroe Center is able to do 60 beds. This is the point where I always look at one, right? And 42 are functioning right now, and some of those would be detox capacity that was tied into the same challenges that we heard from CATC around Ernie Turner about the detox portion of that. And so just to say that detox, every time somebody says detox in my brain, it translates as, oh, the first step of treatment. Because if you don't have detox, then treatment, then housing, people tend to fall out of the treatment continuum more readily than they might otherwise. So 60 is what's out there, and what could be, I think, reconfigured with what's on the table. Now, just kind of a future placeholder for conversations, that the Medicaid reform bill passed, that did pass, and so that brings many new opportunities, along with some other federal changes around how many of those units you can have together. There are some ways to get exemptions for treatment, to have more units than had previously been allowed. There's a lot of changes, and so it really needs to be a community conversation about what are the other providers considering. I've heard that maybe A&MC and Providence and some of the other big players it'll be a better environment for them to provide more of the services that have gone out in different ways in the past. So it's sort of a new day in terms of that service configuration.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anything further for us, Nancy?
That's all I have.
Well, we'll open it up to any comments from the public. Kenny? Sorry. Peterson?
Thank you. I'd like to my name is Kenny Peterson. I'm in business, and so I kind of think of this as business a little bit, or a movie or something. And so I see the producers and I see the director. Or we here, we create a nice movie, or in a business, the board and the chairman of the board and the president you hired to kind of implement the plan. And so I realized that in a plan, you got to know where you're headed. And in our business, you got to have three things: sales, operations, and finance. And so I thought that as producers, some of the ways that I've seen that you might be able to support what they're doing is, first of all, about 12 years ago, you created a organization called the HCOSH, which is a subcommittee of the HAN Commission. They're the ones who you authorize to have the community plan. The community plan's been presented to you, and just recently, a couple weeks ago, we reviewed this action plan as the HCOSH that you guys created. I'm a member on that board. And we passed a resolution that this action plan would be the implementation portion for the single adults of the community plan. So if you guys agree, then I suggest that maybe, or I recommend or offer that you might say, we agree to or something. Of the three things, sales, probably the things that might be helpful from my vantage point is that you'll have a lot of folks, neighbors and church groups and so on that will want to volunteer. You'll hear that when you go to your community councils. Probably want to find out how and that they'll want to come in and how they can engage. For the sales, or for the operations, you're going to need 150 houses of people for housing first kind of thing. You're going to have NIMBYism. I imagine that if you guys kind of come up as a group and say, we're going to take how many assembly units there are, and you each take 10% or 15% of it or something like that. But each of you, if you start working with your your community councils and help them find out where they're going to put those housing. And then the final one is financing. We're going to need money from the community if we're going to be sustainable. And so I'm sure a lot of people in your community councils will want to know where to give the money and how it's going to be spent. And so if you figure out how the money's going to come in and who you're going to give it to and who's going to decide, most likely an answer is for someone from the mayor's office or the community. So that's it. The plan overall, the sales of people who want to get engaged, the housing where you're going to put them, and then the money where people are going to put in. I think that's really up to the producers for you guys to figure out to kind of how you're going to bring all those together to support what they got going on, just from my vantage.
Thank you, Ken.
Again, my name is Carmen Wenger. I'm the director of the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. The Anchorage Coalition also houses a program called the Continuum of Care, which is able to bring HUD funding into the community. We've been working pretty diligently over the past few years to restructure how that program is administered to make sure that we're using it appropriately in line with the community priorities as well as the HUD priorities, and to reduce administrative costs. Through our last funding application, because of some of the restructures and changes in HUD's chronically homeless definition, we currently have 18 households that are working both with the 4As and with Anchorage Housing Initiatives that will lose the housing subsidy they've had as of July 1st. I just want the committee to be aware of, we've been working on this since October, since the funding awards began to click in, and we are working with Nancy. Where you may hear about this is we're working with Nancy to use some of those first quarter appropriations as a gap to make sure that while the case managers are finding new permanent housing for those clients, that they don't have to fall into homelessness before we can rehouse them. So if you have any questions about that process, I just wanted the assembly to know that we are working on that, and I'd be happy to answer anything.
Mr. Trey.
The 4H needs what, $73,000 to continue their current program?
They've requested 75.
75. It's gone up a bit.
The total request for all 18 households, we estimate if we were to house them for one full year, would be $150,000. The goal would be that it would not it would not be that much because throughout the year we will be rehousing folks, but since we started in October, due to wait lists and the time it takes for turnover and other programs to absorb them internally, we wanted the community to have that full number in front of them and know that it should not go above that. It should in fact be less.
Any other questions? Sir?
As partners with Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness, my subcommittty, HCOSH, my name's Doug Lampkin, I chair the HAN Commission. Probably haven't heard much of us, but I think we're back now. And this was brought to our attention just a week ago, and we called a special session to pass a resolution. We're going to draft a resolution for the Assembly and the Mayor to support finding a bridge for this funding gap. The words I heard here today are very encouraging, and understanding that this is really a no-brainer. We would displace 18 families, and that's not why we're here. So you will be seeing a resolution coming your way to help curb this in a short period of time.
Mr. Green.
First good budget revision should be in front of us on the 26th of this month. So just to let you know, you might want to coordinate with that.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm Nicole Nelson, and I'm the co-chair of the HCOSH, but I wanted to first thank you all for forming this subcommittee or forming this committee on homelessness and for the attention that you're bringing to this issue. I think it's really fantastic. And I also want to support the coalition and the HAN Commission in saying that we really do need to make sure that these families that are going to be displaced aren't unhoused when it comes to July 1st, that really needs to be a priority specifically for these households who are in permanent supported housing currently. And to have those fall into to be displaced would be just unconscionable in my opinion.
Thank you.
Tom? Kenny Peterson said one thing that I ran into a few years ago, NIMBYism. I was one of the co-chairs of a committee when Anchorage Mental Health wanted to buy the Longhouse Hotel in Spenard. Well, on the border of Spenard and Turnagain. Spenard, I think, was in favor. Turnagain said, we don't want those kind of people in our backyard. And I also watched when Carlett Manor was bought and repurposed. And after that, I talked to Ernie Hall and Tim Steele, and I said, there needs to be a process so that when something is identified as a possibility, if the possibility doesn't go away before we can figure out whether we can do this or not. So there needs to be a process in code so that when Anchorage Mental Health or Alaska Mental Health identifies a property they can buy, that it can quickly go through the process instead of the process I was involved with, which it went on for months and months and months, and then just didn't happen because I think everybody got tired of it. So I would encourage the new assemblymen to actually go back to what we talked about, I don't know how many years ago, 4 years ago, and accomplish what we talked about and put something in code so that it will happen in a very quick manner instead of just wasting everybody's time and everybody's money.
Makes a lot of sense, Tom. Any questions about that, Tom? Thanks. Any other questions, comments? We have 5 minutes. Valuable time. Okay. Seeing none, any last comments from the assembly members? I just want to thank you all for coming. I think one of the values of this committee is the fact that you show up, and it helps, get everybody in the community on the same page, which I think is very vital for tackling this issue. We will do our best to try to encourage you. If any of you are not getting our emails from the old committee, Amanda Mosier there in the center, if you give her your email address, she'll make sure you get put on our list so that you get notification when this committee is going to meet again. And thank you all for coming, and we are adjourned.